We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false.
They want the destruction of Western culture, the removal of our history and the statues of our leaders, the demographic replacement of white populations, the removal of traditions, the breakdown of the family, the just every single thing that would result in the West's identity, we are actively trying to destroy. And it goes into stuff like deindustrialization in Europe.
The destruction of the Western identity, but it goes far beyond this because it's not just happening in the United States, it's happening all over the world. As a matter of fact, it's also happening in Mexico.
Sounds on the books now. We have a whole trans rights movement going on in Mexico. It's going woke. Mexico, it's going woke as a whole, which is weird. Catholic traditional country,
right?
And you would think that would match up with some idealism with the United States, but more powerful than all that. Mexico is very much federally going the whole pro Maduro, pro Putin, pro like
socialism, capitalism, communism, almost.
Yeah. So in general, the high level politics in Mexico are all about that, about supporting Cuba, about the fact that the embargo is a human rights violation, about the elections being fair in Venezuela. This is where the mentality is right now, and in all of those ways, the U.S. doesn't matter how woke or left you are, they don't fit that narrative as a friend. So,
the U.S. empire has passed its peak. While its history remains significant, it has been one of the most powerful empires. Its mistakes are not forgotten. Corruption and the abuse of power, particularly in dealing with other nations, have left a lasting impact. The growing global fatigue with U.S. dominance is reflected in the rising influence of the BRICS alliance.
So this is what is growing in Mexico, and the U.S. is very much aware of this. I think we're about to have a new president coming into power, Claudia Sheinbaum, a Jewish Mexican leftist individual who is the first female president of Mexico, handpicked by the former president, the outgoing president, and has a lot of radical ideas and beliefs. Rockefeller Foundation person, by the way, which is pretty kind of interesting, and also BlackRock sponsored. I don't want to go into conspiracies, but you could look into this yourself. It's really pretty interesting. Yeah. So you have this.
Central bankers, the wealth holders, the super wealthy are able to select key opinion leaders that run entire countries, and they spread their philosophies and indoctrinate the people and indoctrinate the public that this is the right way of thinking, yet it was implanted from the very get-go.
The perception in Mexico is one that there will never be an open armed conflict with the United States because of the effects it would have on the U.S. itself. So the U.S. is very much aware that Mexico is its number one trading partner right now. It used to be Canada, but Mexico surpassed Canada. It's also clear to the United States that Mexico, it's on its way to become the new China. It has the industrial base, it has the people to manage that industrial base, and it is and has been receiving a lot of the outflow of investments from China into Mexico. So there's a lot of the Chinese companies were like, you're going to tariff our cars, our electric cars? We'll just build them in Mexico. That's a true thing that happened. The U.S. is very much in a symbiotic relationship with Mexico, and anything that happens in Mexico has an effect in the U.S. That's very clear.
There's an alliance happening between China and Mexico is creating a lot of the products that initially get imported into the United States from Mexico. So if there's tariffs happening in China, they simply export the raw materials to Mexico, or Mexico produces the finished products.
And a lot of the people that showed El Mayo Zambada, who is kind of the historical head of that cartel, how to do his business, were people that were operating during the Bay of Pig incident. CIA guys that knew well enough about arming paramilitary groups and moving things through the air, on the ground, and through the sea.
We get a lot of calls from this. Keep going.
This is historical knowledge. People know Mayo Zambada that lived in LA. These are, I've heard stories, and again, these are just stories that I've heard during my time, of the U.S. asking for aid during 9/11 when the attacks happened to secure the border, and some of those calls were placed to the Sinaloa cartel. When you talk about securing the border, you're not going to call the Mexican army to secure the border.
You call the cartel.
You call the cartels.
El Mayo was late into his 70s when he was caught. This was one of the most wanted men in the entire world. And they were able to catch him late into his 70s. There was a purpose of why he was still allowed to be free. And that was one of the reasons why was to make sure that whoever's crossing the border, the intelligence agency were fully aware of whoever was crossing the borders.
He was very essential and important for the U.S. and in U.S. interest. And it's interesting that he was there to see the Sinaloa cartel. But now that he's out of the picture, at least as far as decision making and movement in Mexico, now you're seeing a cleanse of all of his operatives in Mexico, and it's not too clear who's doing this cleansing. Some people might consider him, some people in his own criminal organization might consider him a traitor, or it might be an internal war brewing, or it might be the federal government down there trying to clean its tracks. Who knows? But it's very clear that something is looming in the future for Mexico and the United States as far as some sort of confrontation. And again, I've been talking about some sort of military intervention in Mexico for the past 3 years now. I said 5 years 3 years ago, and we're on our way to the end of this. We're on our way to something, I guess.
The CIA is not a law enforcement agency. They're an intelligence agency. They're an intelligence agency that it works directly underneath the president, and they don't have a congressional budget. Their budget works through the executive branch, and that's why throughout history you'll see the CIA intertwined with different types of illicit means like arms and narco trafficking, because they usually hire paramilitaries, which are militaries that are for hire, and then they get. This begs the question: why was El Mayo arrested now? After he's over 75 years old, he is a multi-billionaire. Why now? The cartels were helping the United States post 9/11. They're on the lookout for people of Arab descent crossing the border. So El Mayo's specialty is bribing officials. He has the most dirt on the most amount of government officials, and now he is in custody. So you can imagine what's going to transpire next.
The simple fact is that the future outlook for any first world country, and the United States included, is dark. It's bleak. It's difficult. In my assessment, World War III has already started. World War III has been going on for almost a full decade now. When you think about World War I and World War II, the two conflicts were totally different, even though they were only a few decades apart. And when you think about how war has evolved since World War II, to Vietnam, to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, through to even what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, the nature of war is always evolving. Why would we think World War III would look anything like World War II, nuclear weapons and superpowers. Instead, World War III is based off of common current military doctrine, which the most current military doctrine is the doctrine of proxy war. When you have two vested competitors who are funding proxies to fight on their behalf. What was Syria? What was Libya? What is Yemen? What is Ukraine? What is Israel? These are all countries that are the conflict is being funded by outside aggressors.
There are proxy wars all over the globe. There are super giant nations, conglomerates, large corporations, all funding wars because there's ways to make money from this. You have to remember the history. The Opium Wars were a conflict between China and Britain. It was triggered by British trade of opium in China, which led to widespread addiction. When China attempted to suppress the opium trade, Britain retaliated militarily, ultimately forcing China to cede territory like Hong Kong and grant trade concessions, weakening China's sovereignty. This was a way for the British to get silver and all of their natural resources from China. At the time, China wasn't trading with the rest of the world. And by introducing opium to China, it was the addiction that led to all of their wealth being siphoned to the British. And today, the fentanyl crisis is a modern parallel. As synthetic opioids, fentanyl have caused widespread addiction and deaths, especially in the U.S. Fentanyl is mostly illicitly produced in China and Mexico.
Processes go from like small batches in some weird laboratory somewhere to now industrial level loads of it with giant crystal shards showing up on the street and also showing up in cars that were loaded up to go to the U.S. And a few times we found some Chinese nationals in some of these laboratories basically showing and educating some of these people to do what they do. It became quickly apparent to me and to anybody I asked, because who do we ask? We did our research. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who was in the intelligence community. He said that any Chinese national is part of the Chinese state, and as such, they're all members of. They're all Chinese intelligence, basically. There's no such thing as separating, Chinese criminals that are acting independently of the Chinese state. This doesn't work that way. Everybody's
country structured.
Yeah, everybody's in on it, basically.
The Sinaloa cartel is a bit decentralized. El Chapo was one of the leaders, but so is El Mayo. El Mayo was a very different character than El Chapo. El Mayo believed in bribing people rather than using violence, so he was one of the key figures in bribing many of the Mexican government officials, as well as anyone that could be bribed, he was able to bribe. So he knows exactly who's dirty and who's on the payroll, so to speak. So in this context, when we're talking about China working with the new generation cartels, this now becomes homeland security. It becomes national security. It's a much bigger issue than just drugs alone.
So it wasn't like they were smuggling hidden containers of fentanyl or methamphetamine precursors in a secret compartment in a hole in a ship. They were pumping it in directly into the pharmaceutical industry. And guess who was a part of that pharmaceutical industry? Some of these members of some of these cartels were basically there just take this for us and do that.
Mm-hmm. NATO has a list of substances as well as precursors that are not supposed to be traded openly. There's limitations on how many precursors are made, how much. So China openly sending shipfuls of precursors as well as finished products to Mexico and giving it directly to cartels is beyond international crime. It's international crime, and it breaks UN treaties.
We start to see, and I think the U.S. caught on to it later. We start to see some of the Chinese banking industry and some of these banking maneuvers that they were doing in their own money processes having some links to places in the U.S. That's how they would make money disappear on the U.S. side and make it appear on the Mexican side. Money brokers in China that were using some of the Chinese institutions to move around some of that cash, some of that money. In the past, you would see cars loaded with money driving down to Mexico. That you would see some of that. That's not that common anymore because that's passe. Not using that anymore. So you start seeing clear evolution of some of these criminal organizations and their influence from some of the supply networks in China.
The international banking system is an opaque system, and China is one of the largest players in this system. It has a tremendous amount of wealth. There's a ton of banks that do business with China, and it's very easy to funnel money through Chinese corporations and shell corporations. What's ironic about all of this is HSBC was founded during the Opium Wars. It was one of the biggest beneficiaries of the Opium Wars. And now they were caught banking the Sinaloa cartel, including El Chapo. And they were fined $800 million for doing so.
And all that originates from a Pacific side-based cartel, the New Generation Cartel, who has access and control over some of the major ports like the one in Colima and Manzanillo. And you can clearly see a pipeline and a sign that they're basically in cahoots and or somehow influenced or proxied by China.
These are militia groups that are being somewhat sponsored by nation-state actors. So if we are in World War III, and World War III is taking the form of proxy warfare, this is just another extension of it.
So this is the sentiment that the political elites that are now in power in Mexico are utilizing to further their agenda. U.S. is bad. Look at what they did here. Look at what they did there. Look at what they're doing to our friends and compatriots in Venezuela and in Cuba, and look at all the ways they've meddled in the past against us.
The internet is the age of information. There are no more secrets. All that was done in the dark is coming to light. The world is having a visceral reaction to the Western world and its hegemony. And I'm afraid when it swings, it will swing too far.
Be an internal war brewing, or it might be the federal government down there trying to clean its tracks. Who knows? But it's very clear that something is looming in the future for Mexico and the United States as far as some sort of confrontation. And again, I've been talking about some sort of military intervention in Mexico for the past 3 years now. I said 5 years 3 years ago, and we're on our way to the end of this. We're on our way to something.
The Bretton Woods system was more about globalization. It was a reaction to the atomic bomb. For the first time, there was a technology that was so groundbreaking that you could just evaporate the entire Earth. So we had to invest in ourselves, and we did that by globalization, by spreading out the supply chain. The entire monetary system had to do with this new technology of splitting an atom. Well, today we have various different technologies that are being introduced. Crypto, blockchain, artificial intelligence, drones, quantum computing. These have enormous potential, and we're going to see groundbreaking paradigm shifts like we once did before.
The current administration, the current Biden administration, and what could be the next administration with Harris are not friends of the Mexican government. They're completely right now they're in conflict. Whoever comes next, as far as an administration, like whoever wins this next election, might kind of like tell us where this is going to go. But if it keeps going on with this current political trajectory, which is very much confrontational and silent, which is kind of scary, I think we're in for some sort of conflict at the border.
China working with these new cartels is somewhat reminds me of the Belt and Road Initiative, where countries sign a terms of service, and really what they're getting is something more than they bargained for. And it would not surprise me to start seeing Huawei 5G towers in Mexico. It would not surprise me to see cartels funneling money into China's CBDC, as well as these surveillance systems that you see in China, but the cartels using them on their own people. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Patreon or my ghost site, dmjr.ghost.io.